Hello YouTube. I did not expect to be uploading today, but a certain video graced my feed. A video by Mike Israetel regarding PEDs. And the second I saw the title, I knew I was going to have to make a response. So before we get into that, since this is technically a drama video, I want to preface by saying two things. First, I'm not going to talk about programming or nutrition, because I believe that on that, Mike is extremely sharp. He gives good advice. This is not the focus of this video. This video's focus is going to be 100% PEDs, and especially the type of advice that Mike gives people who want to jump on PEDs. And then I also have to mention the fact that Mike himself is someone who was natty at some point, and he is most likely on PEDs now. It's extremely important that you accept that, because even though I know he never actually said it out loud for legal reasons, if you don't accept that point, you're not going to understand the rest of my argument. But in my word, because he's on PEDs, he is by default biased. Therefore, this means that even though he knows something about natty training and enhanced training, he is himself currently enhanced, and therefore he has the brain of an enhanced lifters, and he gives the type of advice that is in line with that identity. And the last thing, and probably the most important for the people watching right now who like Mike, I must say, in all fairness, that Mike has done a ton for steroid prevention. You go on his channel, you look at the collabs he's done, he's made prevention videos telling people to not do drugs. And so you could tell me, well, the video that you're talking about also opens by Mike saying, hey, don't do drugs. It's even in the title, don't do drugs. So why are you making this video? You're just trying to get clicks. You're not technically incorrect, but it's not for the reason that you think. I believe that what he perceives to be prevention is actually worse than what some other PED users are doing. He thinks he's helping, but is actually dragging people in, and he's facilitating the use of PEDs in people who would have otherwise never touched that stuff. And that is the problem we're going to be discussing today. Because saying PEDs are bad as a warning, as an introduction to a video, does not mean that your responsibility suddenly disappears in thin air afterwards. If I open a video by saying trend is bad, and then I spend 50 minutes telling you how good trend is, the statement at the start does absolutely nothing, and it's something that everyone should be aware of. If you start by presenting cons, followed up by benefits, people only remember the benefits, especially if these are teenagers or a young audience, which is why all of these videos talking about PEDs that open by saying kids don't do drugs, but then is just 20 minutes of all the good things about PEDs end up leading teenagers towards the path of hard drugs and steroid use every single time. And Mike's video is no exception. I believe that mostly his opening stance, saying that you should never do drugs and that only a fraction of people are going to do drugs, is heartfelt. He believes in that. I also feel like he's trying to protect his ass in terms of legal issues. But at the end of the day, whether he believes in what he's saying or not does not matter, because it does absolutely nothing. And then in the same line, we have to look at Mike's 10 years rule. A rule that is not specific to Mike. I've heard a ton of people who preach PED or who speak about PED with a neutral stance use, and that is if you haven't put in 10 years of natural training, don't do drugs. The problem is that this is just a way for these people to not take responsibility for the fact that they're going to hype up PEDs. They put these arbitrary numbers up saying, okay, I warned you that if you don't put in your 10 years, you're not supposed to touch it. So anyone who touches it before went against my advice, and therefore it is not my fault if they actually get hurt, if they get addicted, etc., etc., etc. It is just a way for Mike and for anyone who uses it to cover their own ass. And on top of that, I must question that arbitrary number because, again, based on statistics, almost no one has spent 10 years seriously training as a natty with perfect nutrition. And that might also go for Mike. Again, this is not me taking shots, but it's a legitimate question I'm asking. Did Mike put in his 10 years natty? Because if you look into his past, you look into his channel, the first video of the channel was 6 years ago, he was already on drugs. Maybe I'm just completely ignorant, I don't know everything about the guy's past, I didn't go full detective mode on his ass, But when exactly did he achieve anything naturally? Maybe you're going to surprise me and tell me he was amazing. The one picture I could find was a before-after when he was natty and then on drugs, and when he was natty, he looked like nothing. So where are the 10 years that he tells people to put in? Did he wait for 10 years? Because if he didn't, that's completely hypocritical. You cannot sit there and tell people, hey, don't do drugs, or if you do drugs, follow these crazy Draconian requirements, but you yourself not follow them. This is simply not honest. This is, again, just a way to clear the speaker of any responsibility. A thing that I hear people say a ton when that type of video gets brought up is, oh, they're doing prevention, right? It's a prevention against PED use, and it works because people are going to do drugs regardless of what you do. So the few that are going to actually go ahead and do drugs, they're going to be more responsible with their use. And that's a stance that Mike himself espouses. Again, the law of number goes against that entirely. If only a tiny fraction of people, and these are Mike's words, only a tiny fraction, which should represent therefore 0.1%, I guess, that's a tiny fraction, are going to do drugs, why is he making a video in the first place? It's not going to touch your audience. Your audience is 99% natural lifters who got started 3 years ago. It has nothing to do with actually helping people be more responsible, because keep in mind that these prevention videos are in reality only promotion videos. And the proof I have of it is very simple. Look at the explosion in PED use ever since the start of what I call the honesty era. I don't know if you remember, if you guys are OGs of YouTube Fitness, but there used to be a time where steroids were hush-hush. No one said anything about it. All of the bigger PED users who were like 260 pounds kept saying they were natural because no one wanted to admit they were on drugs. And at some point, Pandora's box was open and people started to be honest about their use. And you can think, okay, honesty is good. But look at what it did. Now it's widespread. Now everyone talks about PEDs. There are memes about PEDs. You have teenagers joking about tren. The only thing it did is it made PED use more widespread because it made it more visible in the eyes of the audience. It used to be something under the carpet, and now it is something that is absolutely mainstream. It is completely idiotic to believe that the democratization of drug use is going to reduce drug use. I hear people say that all the time, oh, if we legalize this drug, there's going to be less users. No, dumb fuck, there's going to be more users. You made it easier to access. It's the exact same on YouTube Fitness. So every video you see where someone talks about PEDs and their use, even if they preface by saying this is prevention, this is a straight up lie. This is actually a promotion video, and there is absolutely no way to contradict that. Look again at the steady increase of PED talks on TikTok, on Instagram. It is now absolutely everywhere, and kids are jumping on them faster and faster. And now we get into the million-dollar question. Is there a responsible way to do steroid use? Because again, Mike and people like him make these videos to help the guys who are going to jump in regardless, which, as I just proved, don't exist. They create these dudes and then give them advice. It allows them apparently to be more responsible about that. And it's a term I've heard a million times, responsible steroid use. I'm here to tell you today that there is no such thing. There is no such thing as a responsible steroid use. You cannot responsibly use hard drugs. It's completely nonsensical. These are hard drugs. And for the people trying to separate the two and saying, oh, it's not the same, explain to me how it's not the same. Steroid is psychologically addictive, physiologically addictive, the two hand in hand. The only reason why it has become so accepted on YouTube Fitness is for why I already explained. It is presented as prevention, so no one questions it, and when it actually promotes, people just step back and say, well, I told you it was prevention and you took it as promotion, so it's not my fault. If I were to give you an analogy to prove to you that there is no such thing as responsible steroid use, it would be like saying that there is a responsible way to play Russian roulette. For example, if you know exactly how to rotate the cartridge and you can calculate when it's going to land and you know exactly the statistics, you know the rules, you know all of the risks involved, etc., you're still playing Russian roulette. It's still completely random and it's incredibly dangerous. There is no safe way to play Russian roulette. There are just ways to slightly increase your chance of survival. His advice is encouraging people to play Russian roulette, And on top of that, it feeds them a false sense of safety because they believe that they're going to be just fine. There is no just fine. There is always someone who loses in a Russian roulette game. And plot twist, the person who loses is never the gun. It's always the people who uses the gun. Why exactly is he making these videos? As I've already proven, it's not for his audience. His audience is not made up of PD users. If anything, he encourages them to take PDs, to play Russian roulette. So what could be the other explanation? Why is someone who is always cited by everyone to be a great source for natural lifting making so many videos about PDUs? Well, there could be a few explanations. It could be, for example, that he's trying to internalize his own use. As we know, he is on drugs, and therefore maybe these videos make him feel better about his use. That could be one thing. Maybe he's someone who's just naturally curious, someone who is a chemist at heart. But if that's the case, he should just take that curiosity and keep it under locks, because it's not something that you should be sharing. Again, it's just doing more harm than good. Or he has realized that PD talk is extremely attractive and that it gets you views. I'm not going to accuse anyone of clout chasing here, because at the end of the day, I'm name dropping him in the title, but it's something that must be raised. It's not just limited to YouTube fitness in the US. France is the same. Every country is the same. People have realized that a lot of young guys are deeply attracted by PEDs. It's a temptation that's always in them, and therefore even those that stay natural and want to stay natural want to hear more. But why do they want to hear more? I was in that boat as well. Why did I spend so many hours listening to videos about fucking tren, Deca, Debo? Why do I know so much about these drugs and substances and molecules? Well, it's because I was getting myself lured in. I was listening to all of these great things, all of these great benefits. Oh, I'm going to get huge. If I take this, I'm going to look like this. Every young man wants more muscles, and Mike knows it. He knows that when he speaks about PEDs, all of the cons just go like this. We don't listen. But the second you talk about benefits, more veiny, bigger, more endurance, oh, now we're listening. Now the ears of the teenagers are perked up, and this is where the damage occurs. If you don't resist and you talk about PEDs, even if you preface it with warnings, you end up giving horrible advice that is going to get people hurt because you are not objective. And this is where we actually enter into the actual advice that Mike gives in his video about oral-only cycles. So, in his segment, again, he prefaces, don't take steroids, it does absolutely nothing, and then he moves on to why you should do orals and not injectables. And in his mind, it's because it's easier to get rid of the cycle, to just cut the cycle cold turkey. If you only do orals, there's going to be less side effect, it's less of a risk. He presents it in his own words as dipping your toes in. So instead of jumping in the water like an asshole, you're going to dip your toes in to make sure the water is nice and not too cold, not too warm. He uses the metaphor of sharks in the water, crocodiles in the water, some hybrids. It's a great metaphor, and you'll see that I'm going to reuse it for my own argument. The issue with his entire thing is that it's the entry to a slippery slope, something that you will see. And you will notice that his video is only 10 minutes long, and in the 10 minutes, he spends at least 3 minutes joking. You're going to want to get people entertained. So you make jokes, you try to be funny. But it's a pattern of behavior I've noticed with people who make prevention videos about PEDs, because they try to make the topic less severe. But that's a problem. You don't want to do that. Because if you do, you're going to end up like one of those rappers that is sent to a high school to make like a song about drugs, like how drugs are bad. Yeah, but the issue is that the medium you chose to promote your prevention is ridiculous. So people are not going to actually take it seriously. Likewise, when Mike makes all of these jokes about the sharks, etc., it's very funny, but it also is going to be something that is going to lighten up the mood. You should not lighten up the mood. You're talking about hard drugs that could potentially kill people. Stay serious. Everyone does it. All of these YouTubers who talk about drugs and they say, oh, this is a serious topic, it doesn't stay serious very long, and it very soon starts to err in the side of entertainment. This is not a circus. It's not sexy for a reason. It's supposed to be prevention. If you drop that, you're doing promotion. There's no way around that. But the jokes all circle around the same theme, and that's the theme of being pulled in. Again, you're near the water, you're going to get pulled in by the drugs. Mike makes, again, a light-hearted joke at that and say, oh, you're going to get pulled in, sure. But that's the thing. That's what addictions do. Don't make a joke out of it. That's how it starts. People always get pulled in. It's why drugs are so bad. A drug is not something you take once and it ruins your life. It ruins your life after months and years. It sucks you in. It isolates you from the people that you love. It robs you of your health. All of that starts because you dipped your toe one time. So don't present dipping your toe as a safe option. It's not a safe option because yes, the sharks and the crocs can still pull you in. It's exactly what happens times and times again with people. And also I have to question the motive of the man who dips his toes. Because if you dip your toe, aren't you preparing yourself to go deeper? Isn't that why you're testing the water in the first place? So what the fuck is that safe option of yours? Because at the end of the day, you still jumped in. What if you dipped your toes and the shark and the crocs were smart enough to hide underneath the surface, and once you're far enough from the shore, they catch your ass? This is how most people get caught. Most people get caught dipping their toes in because, I've said it one time, I'll say it a million times, there is no such thing as one cycle. No one does one cycle and then stops. Unless you face like catastrophic health consequences, people get addicted. Chasing the dragon is a very real thing and is the reason why PEDs are so dangerous. You will go back in because once you're in the water, you're not coming out. And that also is something that every PD users know, and they should be more transparent with that. Once you let yourself get sucked into that wood, that is it. You're going to be a roid head for the rest of your short life. So based on this, jumping in and getting a good scare might actually be better. If we look at the metaphor of the crocodile, something that Mike contradicts with his advice, because his big idea is again that you dip your toes in and that way you're more ready to put more of the food inside and then the leg, etc. And he says that if you jump in directly, you're going to get beaten and then die. But wouldn't it be better to just jump in and maybe get lucky enough to see the crocs and then go out of the water? What he's doing is that he's making it easier for people to get sucked into the addiction. Whereas, again, if they got onto that cycle and they got that big scare right off the bat, maybe they could have saved their asses. Maybe they could have exited the lake or the body of water and said, okay, this is infested with crocodiles. I will never set my foot in again. What I call the boating frog effect. The boating frog effect is what gets the ass of every PD user because when they get started, they have no side effects. It's the honeymoon period. Everything is going fine. Something that Mike prescribes because if you do orals only, it's most likely what is going to happen. What you don't see, however, is that you're being boiled alive. Exit the crocs, you are into a crock pot. You entered the water, you dipped your toe, the water was nice. You get into the water, it's cool, you're swimming, everything is good. And slowly but surely the temperature of the water rises. But you don't notice because you are in the water. You dipped your toe. If you had jumped into the water when it was already boiling, it would have burned, but you would have exited the crock pot and be saved. But this time you don't. And just like the frog, you get boiled alive. Before you know it, your life is over. PEDs have the same effect. The negatives accumulate, but they are camouflaged by the positives. And when they explode and your health completely short circuits, it's already too late. You have went too far. Mike says that this strategy allows people to back off. Because again, you dip your toe, you don't like it, you back off. But the problem is that if you look at orals only cycles, positives always show up first. Orals usually kick in within 2 days, whereas if you do an actual injectable cycle, you won't see anything before the 4th week mark. This is, according to Mike, a good thing because you get all of the benefits outright and you don't have to deal with the long ester and the fact that it's much harder to quit an injectable cycle. But this is also where I disagree entirely because it's not taking into account the psychological addiction of PEDs. What do people love with PEDs? Is it the actual injection? Some people do, but it's the weirdos and the freaks. No one likes the acne, no one likes the bad side effects. What people actually love in PEDs is the good shit. The good shit that orals are going to give you plentifully at first. But the vicious thing about orals is that there are still negative side effects. It's just that once they're almost invisible, and two, they accumulate. But they accumulate behind your back. Again, the water is slowly boiling. Everything was peachy at first, and then you are fucked. It's what I call also the Stockholm syndrome of PEDs, which is why Mike coming forth and saying, hey, do orals, you get the benefits and no sides at the start, so it's better, and on top of that, you can stop whenever. He thinks it's a good thing, but it's not, because it participates in the slippery slope. It would be best to actually have a terrible first interaction with PEDs. That way you understand that it's best to actually not do that at all. And then Mike also says that injectable cycles are bad for the people who do it for the first time because of needles. And in the same vein, pun intended, I guess, he doesn't seem to understand that this is actually a positive of injectable cycles. This is the reason why it's best to not prescribe orals for people who want to get started with PEDs. If they are faced with only one choice, and that is to jab themselves with foreign substances, a large portion of the population is not going to go for it because it's too scary. They're going to pussy out. I guarantee you that the democratization of PEDs has been brought forth by the accessibility of the substance via orals and via SARMs. Why do you think SARMs are so terrible? Why do you think they're such a plague amongst teens? It's because they're very easy to purchase and very easy to consume. They are not as scary. That same teenager would never inject themselves. But if you start them off with a SARM, like a few drops on the tongue here and there, then they're going to move on to orals because they're a little bit used to it, and then they're going to also naturally be more used to injections down the line. Here is the slippery slope. Here is the kid who did his toe, got more comfortable, learned how to swim, and got eaten by the shark. There used to be a time where if you were a teen, if you asked for a cycle, you would be faced with that long-ass list of products, milligrams, the guys would tell you to do, oh yeah, 500 milligrams for your first test cycle, bro. It would scare the shit out of people. And on top of that, it was also accompanied with a PCT, something that Mike makes fun of. But the PCT was also the part that scared people because it's drugs you had to go get at your local pharmacy or most likely on the black market. All of these things prevented people from actually taking drugs. These were actually positive. Nowadays, I have noticed that the advice is starting to move more towards accessible forms of drugs, which also means that more people do drugs. It's the exact same with hard drugs. There used to be a time where something like cocaine was extremely hard to get by in the 60s and 70s unless you had good connections or a ton of money. Nowadays, you can go up to any schmuck in the corner of the street. He has cocaine to sell you. What did he do? Cocaine is now widespread. The use has been multiplied by 5 since the 80s. Why? Accessibility. At no point is accessibility a good thing. It's something that needs to be combated. Also because, slippery slope again. You start with coke, you're not going to stop with coke. It's going to go somewhere else. And so it is incredibly dangerous to give that type of advice to people who would have done it regardless. Well, maybe they would have done it regardless, but there was an actual wall that was going to keep them away, and that wall was injection, because injection give a strong scare to people. And on top of that, as Mike knows, they give no result at first. So how many people would start, know nothing, and say, oh, it's bunk, it doesn't work, and they move on and they never touch the stuff again. Whereas with the orals, they will see result, and therefore they're going to actually quite like it. But the issue is that orals also have side effects, and they might even be worse down the line than something like an injection, because orals are deeply liver toxic. Liver toxicity is not something to fuck with, and especially in teenagers. Imagine a developing teenager, and I know, he says not to do drugs. Disregard that. Teens are stupid. They're going to use their parents' credit card to go and try to buy these things. And the problem is that we've gotten to the point where it's extremely easy to actually find these products on the black market. And if you purchase orals on the black market, you're going to find one thing: there is no label. You don't get a box. It's a bullshit tablet with pills with no names on it. You don't even know what you're taking. Let's cut the crap. No one is getting pharma grade stuff. Maybe Mike is, but the average kid is not. They're going to go up to the biggest guy in the gym and say, hey, where do you get your stuff? Can I get something? They're going to get some garbage made somewhere in China or something that is not going to be top quality. They're going to absolutely know nothing about what they take. They're going to take bullshit dosages, because if you think that teens are going to count the amount of pills they take, the guy is going to take pills to have a 2-plate bench. You think he's not going to pop an extra pill here and there to be able to get there faster? Of course he is. This is the issue with giving responsible advice to people who are deeply irresponsible. I believe that Mike is responsible, but I believe that the people who listen to him simply are not. And then we have to get into the comical topic of Anavar. Mike has a thing for Anavar, maybe because he believes it to be the safest of the unsafe drugs. I'm not going to discuss that. The one thing I'm going to discuss is the identity of the Anavar itself. Because if you look, again, at surveys, and if you actually take a look at drugs collected throughout the US when there are busts, every single time, law enforcement catches people who sell Anavar and they test the product, it's not Anavar. It's always Debo. You know why? Anavar is not that easy to actually manufacture. From what I know, and this is again taking directly after the great Rich Piana, who knew his shit concerning drugs, there was a time where most of the Anavar in the US came from Germany and from certain factories, meaning that it wasn't as easy as making it directly on the territory. I don't know how the situation is right now, but I can tell you one thing. Most of the people who think they're taking Anavar are not taking Anavar. They're taking something that is much more liver toxic and for the most part more anabolic, but also, and that is the kicker, more androgenic, meaning that there are more side effects and it's harder to come off of these substances. And therefore, this also means that these substances do shut you down. A big point of Mike's argument is saying, hey, if you don't inject anything, your normal test level and your test production is not going to be impacted as much. And it's correct. It's correct that coming off of orals doesn't do a number on your test like injections do. But it still does a shit ton, especially if you are not actually taking Anavar and if you took more than the required dose. Again, I speak from experience. I knew dudes at my uni gym who ran oral-only cycles, following Mike's advice before he actually produced it, and who thought it was safest, who got a ton of gains, don't get me wrong, they got massive off of it, but then they came off without PCT, because apparently you don't need a PCT since you're not shut down, and they looked like lost puppies for months afterwards. Months. And you know what the funniest part is? They lost all their gains. Because why wouldn't they? Mike doesn't really talk about that. But I think that in the way he presents it, he wants people to believe that they're going to keep their gains. Why would you keep your gains? You needed the oral to get the gains in the first place. You think you're going to keep it afterwards? How does that make any sense? If that were the case, why would people blast and cruise? If you can just do a cycle and then come off and keep all of the gains. People would just do one cycle a year and then rest for the rest of the year and then do it again. But that's not what happens. What happens is people stay on forever because they realize that if they go off, they lose everything. I will always remember the look on that guy's face who got all massive and puffed up, coming into the gym lost, going from machine to machine, no gains, no strength, pain in the tendons all the time, and looking at me and be like, I don't understand what happened. Well, what happened is that guy bought into the idea that orals were going to be safe and easy to come off of, and it simply wasn't the case. They also shut you down. And then we have to talk about something that pisses me off to the core, something that Mike is not really culpable of, but he says, so I'm going to have to mention. Mike says in his video that if you're a woman, none of that advice applies to you. And for that, kudos to you, Mike. Thank you for doing something right, because it's absolutely correct that women who take PEDs are taking a much greater risk than males, especially those who think they're taking Anavar, because again, you're not taking Anavar. All of these, what is the name we give them? Varbies, all of these chicks who think, oh, I'm just taking something that's anabolic, it's not going to do anything to me. Yeah, you're actually taking Debo and you're going to look like Borat in 3 years. You're going to end up with a mustache, you're going to have to shave, your nose is going to get all fucked up, you're going to have a square jaw. Look at the damages that PEDs do to a woman. Is it any wonder? They're females, they're not supposed to take male hormones, they're transitioning into males. Thank God Mike says that women shouldn't even take Anavar, at least in his video he does. But then he points out to a guy that I don't know, called Joe Jeffrey, that apparently advises women on taking PEDs. Now, I don't know the dude again, but I have one thing to say. If his advice is not, don't do it, then he's a piece of shit. Anyone who accepts women and says, oh yeah, we're going to put you on this and on that, it's going to be safe, is a liar and is going to damage these people's life forever, potentially causing suicide. Go look up the amount of female bodybuilders that kill themselves in their 40s because they spent their 20s and 30s taking drugs that are all safe and are not going to make you more masculine. Then they wake up one day and they look like Stallone with a wig and they just rope plus chair plus kick plus death. Why? How are you supposed to live like this? How are you supposed to live in that body past your prime when you cannot actually do the drug because, surprise, surprise, women also get health complications from taking PEDs. So one day they have to stop or else they die, and they're stuck in a body that is not anabolic, but not feminine anymore. They can't produce female hormones anymore. So they're stuck with a weird frame and they look like goblins. This is not a life to live. Men should stay away from drugs, but women should especially stay away from drugs. Anyone who encourages women to take drugs is in truth a complete garbage human. I'm going to stop at that. It has nothing to do with Mike. It's just something that I needed to put out there. So, to actually refocus on the actual topic of this video, Mike is right that you won't actually kill your liver in 1 week of oral cycles, okay? I don't want to put that idea in your mind and to make you think you're going to die because you took D-bol on Tuesday and Wednesday. This is not true. What is true, however, is that if it gave you physical and especially psychological boosts, then it must mean that if you stop taking it, all of that is going to go away. So you were here, let's say, you went here, you're going to get back here. Anyone who says otherwise doesn't understand drugs. Why did you take the drug in the first place if it wasn't going to spike you? But my point is that it won't stop you here. You'll go there, and then some, all right? Drugs take. They give, but they take. And when PEDs take, they take everything. It's like the bank, right? You lose your house, your dog, your car, your wife. They take everything. They don't give a fuck. So don't even mess with them. Don't even try. There is actually no point in this. These drugs will shut you down and you will go back to them. This is what's so vicious with PEDs too, something that Mike and every PED user knows. You start with drugs, you stop them, they kick you in the ass, and you're like, okay, well, I have only one option left, and that's drugs again. It's the only thing that will make me feel better. It's the exact same with people who get hooked on prescription drugs like painkillers. When they stop, they just say, oh, I'm just going to suck it up. No, they can't exist without the drug anymore. So they turn to strict drugs. It's the exact same with PEDs. There is no such thing as one cycle. Mike presents it as, oh, if it goes wrong, just quit it, bro. Well, you've tasted the positives. You will never actually quit because you experienced a high. And isn't that why you took the drug in the first place? Because you expected a high. But once you have the high, your new normal is going to be a low. So you're never going to be able to be normal again. And because of that, you won't want to come back down. So you're going to do what Mike actually says. Because he is, as a PED user, I must admit, he's quite self-aware. But I'm wondering why his self-awareness doesn't translate in him not making that type of videos. Because the last 2 minutes of the video is him pretty much admitting that if you do orals and everything goes fine, which most likely it will, because liver toxicity takes years to build up, once it's built up, it's over, you're most likely going to switch to injectables. Because you're going to want more stuff. Chasing the dragon, anyone? Addictions, anyone? He says it himself. And then when that happens, you're in. Right? You jump into the hamster wheel and it's never going to stop. You're going to start with PCTs maybe, and then you're going to do what? You're going to blast and cruise like all of these guys who think it's safe. I do my blood test, bro. 35 years old, heart attack, dead. Nice blood test. I hope it was worth it. A heart attack doesn't show up on a blood test. A ton of organ damage doesn't actually show up on a blood test. But all of this started with dipping your toes. That swimming in the deep waters with all of these drugs and these cycles, all of that started with these orals. So again, the question is, why give that advice in the first place? It's facilitating people. They could have maybe had the scare of their life if they took more. Instead, they're going to take orals. It's going to slowly ease them into that environment, and they're going to get more and more adapted. And this is how actually addiction works. And all of that started again with a safe advice. It all stems from something that apparently is safe. So in truth, looking at that objectively, Mike's advice facilitates the formation of long-term addictions in people who would have otherwise never touched this stuff. And it's the same with all of these channels running prevention about PEDs, because at the end of the day, they are the reason why this prevention is needed in the first place. They create the people that are going to need prevention. If they didn't exist, we wouldn't have that problem. If all of these people stopped talking about PEDs and we went back to the don't ask, don't tell period, it would be a better place. Would it be a more honest place? No, but honesty has done more damage than good at this point. The issue is that, and I'm not necessarily targeting Mike here, but the people giving that type of advice tend to be deeply deluded because you are essentially taking health advice from a drug addict. You're taking health advice from someone who does hard drugs on a daily for years and years and thinks that their health is not going to degrade, that they're going to be just fine. Do they lie to you when they say that? No. I think that they buy into it because it's the only way they can live their life. How do you wake up every day thinking, I'm killing myself? You can't. So Stockholm syndrome kicks in, cognitive dissonance kicks in, and you start lying to yourself. But as a creator, when you have hundreds of thousands of people who follow you, you have the duty to be more responsible and understand that what you are doing can actually take other people. What Mike is essentially doing here is he's in the pool, in the water, and he's telling people, hey, the water is nice, there's no crocodiles here, come join me. But do it safely. Dip your toes in first. Okay, is it really safe? He doesn't know, he hasn't been eaten yet, but he will. Every single PD user will be eaten at some point. The question is, how many people did they actually manage to lure in the pool with them beforehand? The answer should be 0. They should keep that to themselves. If they want to die, it's absolutely up to them, but there is absolutely no such thing as a responsible use, and therefore they should not be preaching that. And for those of them who think that their knowledge, their chemistry or scientific knowledge, is going to make them invincible, they just have to look in the past. How many PD users in the past thought they were in control? You are never in control. If you take drugs, the drug is in control, always, and that also goes for Mike. If you like Mike, it actually is something to be noted that if you have some heartfelt feelings for the dude, or actually you like the dude, you should also look at the fact that you are listening to someone who is directly damaging their health. I said that as someone who has seen many of the people I liked and respected die. We lost Rich, we lost John. Are we going to lose Mike as well? I hope not. They won't admit that to themselves of course, for cognitive reasons, or even to people outright for legal reasons. And I think that this makes any advice they give on PED tainted. Because if you take PEDs, in my opinion, you cannot be trusted in giving advice about PEDs. I know it's paradoxical, but again, would you take advice about addiction from a guy who is addicted to hard drugs? Maybe he knows better, but he also failed. So maybe you should actually direct your sights towards someone else. And that someone else doesn't need to be me. It can be any natural lifter. But if you're a natural, I question the reason why you even consume these videos in the first place. Aren't you trying to warm up? Aren't you a PED fanboys? Aren't you the guy who is ready to jump in the pool? You know, you're warmed up, so you think it's going to be all fine and you're going to take the big plunge? Well, I'm here to tell you that the people in the pool have absolutely no idea how you're going to land. And at the end of the day, the pool is empty. There's no water in the pool, it's an illusion. You're going to break both legs. The best thing for you to do is just stay out of that mess. The video that Mike made should have been called "Don't do steroids." That's it. Cut here. But if you won't do oral only, no, just don't do steroids. Is it maybe something that some people will say, well, it's not realistic? Yeah, but look at what the rest did. Look at what realistic drug prevention did. It encourages people to do drugs. So we have to go back to a more strict and a more severe approach and say, no, just don't do drugs. That way, the only crazy motherfuckers that will do drugs know what they're getting into, and hopefully they're not going to give advice to other people on how to do it themselves. And this is going to close this video because I could go on and on forever. For me, natural lifting is my everything. I want to promote it as much as I can because I believe it to be the optimal way for health, for longevity, for well-being, for everything that a man should aim to be. I hope that Mike shares that, but sadly, in his latest video, he failed entirely at conveying that message. I'm going to leave you with that. Thank you for watching. Have a good night.